Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Future of Work with Jacob Morgan. My guest today is Ryan Hawk. He's the author of a book called Welcome to Management: How to Grow from Top Performer to Excellent Leader. He's also the host of one of the world's most popular leadership and management podcasts called the Learning Leader podcast. Ryan, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jacob. Excited to be with you today, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So I have so many questions for you just about your book, your story, all the stuff that you've been doing over the past few years. Why don't we just start with some background information about you? So going way back to young Ryan, how you grew up, where you were raised, how did you eventually get into doing what you're doing now?
I was born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. It's where I currently live. Went to Centerville High School, went to college initially at Miami University, and ended up graduating from Ohio University. And eventually, after a lot of time playing sports and played in college and played a little bit after college, I then got in the world of professional selling and was able to do relatively well in this at a job, and got promoted a few times, and also went back to school to get my MBA, and considered going back to school again to get another graduate degree. However, instead decided to start my own form of a leadership PhD program, and I wanted to do that in the form of having direct, long-form, one-on-one conversations with professors that were all of my choice. And so I chose to do that in the form of a podcast and called it the Learning Leader Show, because my favorite leaders in the world are the ones who are always striving to learn, to grow, to improve. They don't think they have it all figured out. They realize they need the help of others. They're reading, they're meeting with mentors. They certainly are willing to change their mind when better evidence presents itself. And so, I started that about 6 years ago, and fortunately, people seem to like it. And because of that, it's afforded me the opportunity to leave the corporate jobs that I had about 3.5 years ago, and now it's what I do full time.
Very cool. It's one of the reasons why I started my podcast as well, just to learn from a lot of the business leaders who are out there. Mm-hmm. And so you've been doing this for 6 years. I think you have over like 400 episodes, right?
Yep.
So I'm curious, from all the leaders that you interviewed, are there any that pop to mind as far as being the most memorable discussions you've had? And can you share anything about what you've learned from some of these memorable interviews?
As you know, this is a question that's similar to asking who is my favorite child. And that changes by the day. No. If I had to name a few, I would say it's more along the lines of the relationships that have been built since we've recorded. So The first one that comes to mind would be 4-star General Stanley McChrystal, primarily because we had a great talk. And I looked up to General McChrystal and his book Team of Teams for a long time, and was fortunate that he came on the show. But it was a great episode. But the coolest part was at the end of it, he invited me to come to Gettysburg and tour the battlefield along with him and the class that he teaches at Yale. And I canceled everything and jumped on a flight, and I did it. And did a morning run before the sun came up to the battlefield from the hotel with General McChrystal and his wife and some other friends and students, and then we toured the thing the whole day. I had a big dinner, and it was a life-changing event, and it went well. And I ended up asking him afterwards if he would write the foreword to my book. I just thought, well, I might as well swing for the fences. What's the worst that could happen? And he said yes, and he did. And now he wrote the foreword to my book. So it a lot of lessons learned. If you approach people with genuine curiosity and you're trying to learn, you're interested in their story and them, you never really know what could happen. You could become friends with one of your heroes. And And in that case, it's a relationship that I really value, and I have a number of those, but his is one that's really important to me. So I would say he has come on the podcast again, so he's been on more than once, but also has written that forward and did it as like, he didn't act like he was doing me a favor or anything. He was just said sure, and then really pieced together some really great work that I'm proud is in my book, and it in fact leads off the book. So I would say General McChrystal is probably at or near the top of the list.
How do you compare, and just out of curiosity, having a traditional full-time job with, being an entrepreneur, doing what you're doing now, and not having to be in the corporate world? What do you enjoy more, and why?
You just have complete ownership. All the good and the bad that goes with complete ownership. Something like along the lines of net revenue is not something I necessarily thought of when I was an employee of a big company. Net revenue meaning I have to generate all of the revenue and all of my cost. And that's something as an employee you don't necessarily think about unless you have an ownership stake in the business. So I think everyone would benefit from owning a business in some way, shape, or form, and paying close attention to income and cost and everything that goes into running something on your own. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things I think about is what am I doing to build my business today? How are my efforts towards building my business, whether it's putting together an awesome podcast episode or writing my next book or whatever it may be? What am I doing to help build my business today? And that's something I'm thinking about constantly.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's very different, but it's a fun adventure, and if you have the right mindset going into it, I think it can certainly be a lot of fun and lucrative for people.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to some of the full-time jobs you had. Well, first, do you remember the first full-time job you've ever had?
Of course. I mean, I wouldn't call my summer jobs that I had, they were not necessarily full time, even if I worked 8 hours a day. But my first real job was when I got done playing football after college. I worked as a telephonic sales professional at LexisNexis, smile and dial cold calling.
I've done that before.
Law firms and attorneys. Yeah, I was making 60, 70 calls a day, and sometimes you go 0 for 70. Those are rough days. And I think there's a lot though that can be learned from, especially if you're a young recent college graduate and you don't really know what you want to do, which is with the position that I was in. I think getting a job working in the profession of sales is one of the best choices you could make, because regardless of what you decide to do moving forward, sales and selling will be a part of your life. Yep. Whether you're actually have a sales job with you're carrying a bag and you have a quota, or you're trying to sell yourself, sell your ideas, work with other people, all of that, there's a sales component. Dan Pink's book, To Sell is Human, details all of that. I encourage everyone to read it regardless of your profession. And so for me, that first job being a telephonic sales professional, where I had no idea what I was doing. I never sold a thing in my life. And then at least I didn't think I'd sold a thing in my life, although I was a football player and a captain, and I was having to, in a way, sell others why they should follow me. I didn't realize it at the time. And then getting a job like that in the professional world was extremely helpful for everything that has come since then, because I had to learn the value of perseverance, of getting rejected and coming back day after day after day. And that's hard. It wasn't always fun, but it was rewarding and fulfilling once I started to learn some things and do a bit better at it. And it's helped me in everything else I've done since then.
And you went on to become a sales executive at the company that you were a part of as well, right?
Yeah, started in sales as a rep, and then eventually got promoted to a management role, and then I was a director at the company, and then I went to a sister company of LexisNexis where I was vice president of North American sales. We were responsible for half of for $500 million territory. So yeah, certainly my responsibility went from a small little individual territory to a large team and a whole division of a business.
Were you, like, when you think back to the leadership and the management training programs that you were a part of, first, did you get any formal leadership and management training? And if you did, what was that like?
Um, There was a new manager boot camp as part of our program. I love LexisNexis. I just spoke with their CEO, Mike Walsh, the other day. So nothing but awesome things to say about Lexis. But most companies, and I did a big survey of this as I was writing my first book, most companies don't have an extensive program for people making that initial leap from individual contributor to first-time manager. And so, yes, I had a little boot camp that was a day and a half, and we had a binder that we took with us. But for the most part, the training is on the job, is doing it and making mistakes and trying to learn from them. And so my hope is to try to help minimize the mistakes made by others, that they can learn from the mistakes made by me and many others, and do it better the first time instead of having to stumble their way through for the first few years like I did. So the program was, it existed. There just wasn't that much to it. And in some companies, there's literally no training. In fact, I know because I work with some of them now. So that's an underserved market. And it was another reason why I wanted to focus on that part at that time in your career, because if you ask a lot of people, you'll find that they haven't had a ton of training in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, even when I was writing my book and I was doing research on this, I found that most people actually get into a leadership role at some point, usually first leadership role in your 20s. It could be mid or late 20s, but even if you're a supervisor leading one or two or three other people, but most people don't actually get any formal leadership training until they're in their 30s and in some cases in their 40s. So you basically go for like 15, in some cases 20 years where you're leading people without actually having any kind of leadership training. And you just kind of have to figure things out on your own. And then one day, a decade or two later, somebody says, "Oh, hey, Jacob, by the way, we're going to give you this leadership training program," even though you've been doing who knows what for the last 15 years. And it's completely crazy that is how so many people think about it.
Yeah.
So your book has an interesting title, How to Go from Top Performer to Excellent Leader. So first, what is the difference between being a top performer and an excellent leader? Because oftentimes people mix up the two, and they think that if you are a great performer, you're a great individual contributor, inherently you're a leader, or inherently you're going to be a good leader because you're driving results. But as we now know, those are not the same thing. So what's the difference?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I mean, the way to get the opportunity to interview for a management job at most places and the place where I worked was they look at the top of the stack rankings, and the handful of people at the top of the sales stack rankings get a chance to interview, and they have the best chance to get the job. And the funny part about it is there's very little of what you did as an individual contributor that actually translates to you being a good coach or manager of a team of others doing that.
Yeah.
The skill set's just completely different. And I understand why you look towards the top performer, because basically the thought process is, well, they were really good, so they probably have earned some respect from their peers. Let's elevate them and then tell them, okay, tell everybody else exactly what you did so that you can create a bunch of clones, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I get that's why it happens. However, there are a lot of superstar performers that are horrible coaches. It's just like, did you ever grow up in a math class with a math teacher who was a genius when it comes to solving math equations and math problems? However, what they weren't good at was explaining how to do it to others. Yep. They could get up on the board and I'm thinking one specific teacher right now. He was incredible at actually doing the math problem. But when anyone else who wasn't nearly as smart as him had questions, he struggled to explain how could do it, right? So the same thing happens in sports. Like Magic Johnson coached the Lakers at one point. He was terrible at it, right? But because he's a great player. Michael Jordan, same, not really a great coach. Larry Bird was a coach, but was just okay, a better front office guy of selecting talent than he is actually coaching others. So it's not always the top performer is going to be a great coach. Like, look in the NFL, a lot of the great coaches were not the starting quarterback. They were the backup or the third stringer, or even guys who didn't make it to the NFL are doing it. Sean McVay is one of them. He went to Miami, where I went initially, and was an average receiver. And now he's like the hot coach in the NFL. So I think the same happens in the sales world. The same happens in all the business world, where you're just grabbing the top performer without actually fully checking, can they coach others who aren't as talented as them? Can they help other people who aren't naturally as good as them?
Yeah.
And that's the problem is sometimes we elevate and promote people who are just not good teachers, not good coaches. And a big element of management, of leading a team, is teaching and coaching other people to levels that they didn't even realize they were capable of reaching.
Yeah, and I love the analogy. I think we see that in a lot of different spaces, right? I mean, you could be a great chef, but you have a tough time teaching other people how to cook.
Absolutely.
I take a lot of chess lessons, and I've taken chess lessons with various, grandmasters over the years, and I found that some of them are, while they're amazing players, they have a very hard time explaining concepts and ideas, whereas others who are not, as great a players are very good teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really interesting that we always assume, like you said, we want to create the clones, right? Clearly you figured out the secret sauce, so now teach everybody else how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so how are you seeing that change now? Or are you seeing that change in organizations? Have they figured out that just because you're making a lot of money doesn't necessarily mean you're a great leader of other people?
I think the results are mixed. I think what needs to happen is you have to create multiple career paths for people. The typical career path is you get promoted from an individual contributor to running your own team or to managing a team. And so people see that as the only avenue for growth.
Yeah.
And they feel like if they don't go on that path, they're not growing. When in reality, there are some people that just belong in an individual contributor role. And so companies need to make sure those people feel like they're still growing their career, they're still doing well without going into a management role. So there are ways to do this by giving them more responsibility, more territory, more projects to do outside of actually managing a team or having full-time employees that work for them. I think some companies are doing a better job at that, as well as trying to identify people who have the leadership and management skills early on and work with them long before it's time for them to get promoted, realizing though that it is important that you're a performer. It is important that you do great work at what you're currently doing, but also identifying the other skills and behaviors in a person that they seem to have a strong desire to help other people. They seem to have a desire to put others before them, as opposed to just saying, I'm going to aggressively do my job and not really worry about anything else. And I think it's good to have both sets of people, or a wide variety of people. I loved having people on my team that I knew they're never going to be a manager, and that's completely fine. They're going to crush it here. Let's just do everything we can to support them, to make sure they're feeling growth, to take care of them, as well as there's the other group that maybe they really want to be a manager and they have some of that innate skill and talent that let's work with them to get better and better. So when it comes time for them to run a team, they're in a better position than I was when I got promoted cold and just thought, okay, because I led on the football field, I can lead in the business world. When in reality, it turned out not to be that accurate.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people assume that to become successful, when you get promoted to a management position, that's a sign of growth, of development, of becoming more successful. But like you said, you can be an individual contributor and be growing and becoming more successful. And there are a lot of really great individual contributors out there making a lot of money. They're very, very happy, but they're not necessarily leading others.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe part of it is we need to separate this idea that being in a leadership or in a management position is the same thing as being successful.
Mm-hmm.
Those two don't have to be the same thing. And I think that's something a lot of people have a very, very hard time with, because when you look at the hierarchy, the corporate ladder, that's basically how it's built. The higher up you go, the more people you're responsible for, the more successful you are. And as we now know, that is definitely not the case.
For sure. I think companies are getting better at this, but that's still a path that a lot of people see, where they get an entry level job and think, well, I hope I can become the CEO someday.
Yep.
When that might not be the right path for them.
Yep. No, I mean, that's, when I was in college, that's what I thought I was going to do. I thought I'd be the CMO of a company one day, climb that corporate ladder and, haven't had a full-time job working for anybody else in around 15 years and never looked back. So you never know how things are going to turn out.
It's awesome.
So why do you think top performers oftentimes become leaders? And it's interesting because sometimes they don't even want to be. Like, I've talked to a lot of top performers before who have turned down leadership or management positions inside of organizations because they say it's not worth the responsibility, because they know they're not good leaders and they're just, they're happy to just be on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think we keep forcing or going to the top performers and assuming that they're going to be the leaders? Is it like just a mental block that we have?
I mean, it's been that way for a long time, and
Yeah.
it's probably been that way for people who are in the leadership positions now, especially if they've been in the workforce for many years. And so the assumption is just that's the way it is. So we keep doing it when in reality that methodology of, well, this is the way we've always done it is seriously flawed. So I think that's why that happens. And I have some close friends that are currently individual contributors that are being pressured by their companies. We want you in management, or we want you in a leadership position, and they just have no desire. They're doing really well. They're making good money. They're very good at their jobs. And they also have a life outside of work that they love, their spouses, their kids, and they don't want the extra responsibility of a bunch of people for a little bit, maybe a higher base salary, but maybe not a higher total compensation package, because as an individual contributor, they can do really well. So I do think that's changing a bit, where people don't feel like compelled or forced to go there. They are finding other avenues to be good in their current role and continue to grow in their current role. And companies that are, I think, on the cutting edge are really good at this, that they find ways for growth for people outside of just the traditional path of going straight up.
So when you look at a managerial role inside of an organization, who do you think that is best suited for? In other words, how can you tell if you would make a better individual contributor, or if you should consider going into a managerial position?
I think the people who are best suited for those management jobs enjoy and are fulfilled by teaching and coaching and helping other people. That there are people who feel genuine fulfillment from seeing other people do well.
Yeah.
Their lives are richer by genuinely helping other people do well. I think they're probably more collaborative. They're more selfless. They're more about other people versus the ones who have a goal and are determined to do everything within their power to achieve and exceed that singular goal and mission. And those people also sometimes struggle with others who don't view the world the way that they do. Whereas a manager or a leader has an understanding and a value of a diverse way of thinking, of being surrounded by others who may offer up different points of view, who are willing to put themselves in the other person's shoes and understand life from their perspective and what they're dealing with. And they have the patience and willingness and desire to want to do that, versus the one who just myopically focused on this is what I am going to do, and nobody's going to get in my way, and I'm going to go. Two completely different types of people and styles. Both can be right, as long as like Jim Collins would say, I think I like having both of those types of people on the bus. We just have to make sure they're in the right seat.
Yeah. No, that's very well said. It actually reminds me of a story. I recently had the CEO of US Cellular, Lauren Therivel, on my podcast, and he was telling me this story where earlier on in his career, he was brought into this startup, not a tiny startup, but considered a startup. And he had all these financial goals and all these business metrics that he was supposed to achieve and to kind of help turn the company around. And he created his vision, he created his plan, he did everything, he implemented it. and he met all of his goals. He met all of his objectives. And so the board, all the executive team, they call him into a meeting, and he thinks he's going in there and they're going to be toasting him with champagne and saying, congratulations, you did this amazing job. And he goes into this meeting and they say, well, congratulations, you did everything you said you were going to do. You're fired.
Mm.
And he told me, he's like, what is this, like some kind of a weird joke? And he realized that he got fired because nobody liked him. And it was, like you said, it was only his plan. He didn't bring anybody else along on the journey. He didn't, he didn't have that human aspect of leadership. It was just very much command and control. Here's what's going to happen. Go do it. And although he achieved the goals that he set out to achieve, nobody wanted to work with him. Mm-hmm. And he learned a very, very hard lesson, many, many years ago. And I love that story, that sometimes just because you can do something from a business perspective still does not make you the best leader that's out there.
It's a great point. I think it's maybe underrated skill to be likable. That doesn't mean you do everything for that goal. And I do think there are people that exist that are both respected and liked, but certainly I know when I think about the work that I do and the people I work with, it's much more enjoyable when you're doing with people you genuinely like and you want to be around. I mean, if you're fortunate to get to the point where you get to pick your clients, I'm not choosing to work with clients that aren't enjoyable to be with. I mean, at the beginning, maybe you have to scratch and claw to get whatever you can get. But once you get established a bit and you get your business going and you can choose, not choosing to work with those types of people.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So I want to transition a little bit to talk about your book. So you have these 3 sections in there, which are lead yourself, and then you have build your team and lead your team. So I thought we could spend a couple minutes about talking about each one of those, starting off with leading yourself. And the story that I was hoping you could start off with is, and correct me if I'm wrong, were you battling Hall of Fame quarterbacker Ben Roethlisberger at Miami University?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So can you share a little bit about that and what you learned from that experience?
Sure. So Ben and I are the same age, same recruiting class at Miami, same position. Both played quarterback here in the state of Ohio. Him and Finley, me at Centerville, and went there. Graduated in class of 2000, and went there to Miami in 2000 and started competing for that job. There's a 5th-year senior who was a returning quarterback our first year. And we battled it out for 2 years, rotated in the first few games our second year against Michigan and Iowa. And eventually, his talent was too great. And he ended up earning the job. The late, great Terry Hepner chose him to be the starter, obviously made the right choice. And I think it was good as a good learning because I'd been the starting quarterback, the starting point guard, starting shortstop, pitcher, outfielder on every team I've ever been on. Including my freshman year in high school on the varsity team. And so it was the first time I'd ever wanted something and didn't get it, despite putting everything I had into it. And so when you're 19 years old and somebody tells you that despite everything you put into it and your attitude and your effort was good, but somebody else is just flat out better than you, that really knocks you on your back. And I think we all need times to get knocked down a bit, especially if you get a little bit of an ego and arrogance about you as one would as a starting quarterback, or at least I did. And that's what happened to me. So I was stuck with what do I do? I've been told the only way I'm going to play as a quarterback is if this guy gets hurt. And that did not seem likely. And he never did, by the way, at Miami, and only has gotten hurt very a little amount in his entire really long NFL career, which is still going. So it forced me to really think, what should I do? And I transferred to Ohio University and competed all over again to be the starter there. And then was fortunate to get to play for a couple years and get voted captain by my teammates my final season. And that also gave me the chance to play football after college in the Arena Football League and briefly in the Canadian League. So I think it's certainly one of the biggest inflection points of my life, of doing everything within my power to earn something and have someone else tell me that it wasn't good enough. I think it's probably useful for all of us to have that happen to us a few times.
Yeah. So I love that story. But let's talk a little bit about the section of the book, Leading Yourself. And I love that section because a lot of people forget that before you can lead others, before you can lead a team, you have to start with yourself. So when you say lead yourself, what do you actually mean, and how can you go about doing that?
So one of the phrases that I think is useful for a person to think about is, um, as you mentioned, it's important for us to first look inward before we look outward to help other people. We have to take
Yep.
care of ourselves first. We've heard all of the metaphors about the oxygen mask or other
Yep.
things when it comes to leading yourself. For me, it was all about trying to become, as the great Charlie Munger would say, a learning machine. And if I became that type of person, it would put me in a better position to lead others, to build a team, to lead a team, for others to want to follow me if they saw me as a learning machine, as somebody who was constantly striving to get better. And so I just built this 4-part framework for myself of what it means to be a learning machine, of regularly, 1, fueling my intake engine, 2, of not just being a learner but being a doer, so I'm experimenting based upon what I've learned, 3, of making sure I pause and reflect and analyze what worked of my experiments and what didn't work, what am I going to keep doing, what should I stop doing, and then 4th, regularly putting myself in the position of being a teacher, because teaching is the greatest tool I found for learning. Nothing creates more clarity of thought for me than writing and sharing what I believe with others. I don't want to make a fool of myself when I stand up in front of 1,000 people. I want to get very clear on what I know and what I believe and what I'm about to share with you to help your life. And so in order to do that, I have to get very clear on what I believe. And so that's why that 4-part system is what it's all about for me, to become a learning machine. And that's what equates a good day for me, is if I can spend parts in each of those 4 quadrants of the day. And I found when I do that, people seem to want to follow.
Hmm. So for somebody, because most people who listen to this show, not everybody, but I'd say the majority of people do have a full-time job. And so when they think about that quadrant, can we break it down a little bit? Like, how long does this take? How long do you need to be in each quadrant? What are some things that you can do? Just anything specific that would make this tangible for people so that they can actually bring this into their careers, into their lives, and follow that kind of same approach that you do.
So let's say you have read an HBR article about how to run better meetings. You've met with a mentor and brought this up to him or her about how to run better meetings, and they've provided feedback because they've led teams for many years. So you have this new idea or new sense for how to open a meeting, how to make sure the meeting goes smoothly, how to leave the meeting with great takeaways and action items and people who are responsible for those things, right? Let's say we've learned this through the process of our intake engine because we took it in through an HBR article and a mentor. Second, it does us no good to be like, wow, now I know how to run a meeting. Well, you actually have to go and do it. So you experiment with your new key learning from the HBR article and from your mentor, and you try it out. You actually put it into play. You have a mindset of someone who's regularly experimenting with what they're learning. So you go and do it at your next meeting. And maybe even if you're lucky, your mentor can join you for the meeting so they can be in there and watch, which I've done and I encourage others to do. Third, and this could all happen in a day. Third, afterwards, you reflect on how it went. You asked a few of your core members of your team that have been with you for a while, that you've built good relationships with, where they can really tell you the unvarnished truth. How did that go? We tried something new. What do you think? So you're reflecting on, and your mentor as well, you're reflecting on, I learned this new way to run a meeting. I experimented by actually doing it and running the meeting. Now I'm taking time to reflect, analyze, think, what should I continue and keep doing of the new style of running the meeting? What should I stop doing? And then fourth, let's say you have a meeting with somebody that you're mentoring because now you're in a leadership position, and you say, hey, here's something that happened with me today.
Yep.
I learned about this new way of running a meeting from this HBR article and from my conversation with my mentor. I actually went and did it. Then I reflected on it. And here's a few of the things that actually went really well. Here are a few things I learned. Don't even bother, right? But now is the way that I'm going to move forward. And so you teaching the other person now cements what you've learned, what you've picked up. You want to help that person. So you're trying really hard to understand all the good parts of the new way to run a meeting. And before you know it, you've been in all 4 quadrants in one day, or maybe a few days, whatever it may be, of saying, this is how we do it. And you do that for basically everything within your career or everything in your life, of always striving to fuel the intake engine, run experiments based on what you learned, reflect on how it went, what to keep doing, what to stop, and then sharing it with other people. And it just goes on and on and on and never stops. And if you once you pause at the end of a year and you're regularly behaving, you're like, wow, look at everything we've done over the course of the year. We've changed a lot because you're in this constant state of being a learning machine. And that's how I think you can regularly figure out new and better ways to do things.
Do you recommend going through those 4 quadrants? Is this supposed to be a daily thing? So are you supposed to learn something new every day, implement something new every day, or is there not like a strict rule behind this?
I don't know if there's a strict rule. I don't know how realistic it is to be able to live that way. I mean, I don't want to be robotic and act like you have to do that. I think just like that is a great day. I just described it would be a great work day. That has happened. But I certainly want to spend time in at least some of those quadrants every day. I'm in the first one every day, no matter what. There's going to be some sort of reading, listening to podcasts, watching something, reading, and whatever it may be, that I will spend time every day. Then I want to plan out what the experiments are with what I'm learning. Maybe I learned a new style of opening a paragraph for writing my book. And then I need to think about how that went by sending it to a friend of mine who's a better writer than me to help me out. And then once I figure out what I learned, I'm going to teach it to somebody else. Yeah. So that may take a week, but that's another way that I am on the cycle of learning. And now at the end of that, I'm in a much better position because I'm just always in the mindset of fueling the intake engine and then going through the next steps.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think the important thing is that these could be small things.
Absolutely.
I always like to think of if you could improve by 1% a day, then by the end of the year, you're going to be 37 times better. So 1% a day for a leader might be, like you said, you listen to a podcast article, you watch a video for 5 minutes, maybe you practice empathy. So when somebody comes to you with a problem, before responding right away, you kind of take a deep breath, think of a time when you were in a similar situation, and then respond. Mm-hmm. So you can do these little things. And I think that's important for people to realize, because when they think of trying to become a better leader, sometimes they think, oh yeah, I don't have time for this. It's too much effort. Like I can't do like this whole transformation. But we're talking about small things over time that can yield to a lot of really, really big results. Like you said, reading an HBR article, how long is that going to take? 5-10 minutes, and then try to put something into practice. So I love the kind of simplicity behind it. You also had this great quote, or the great way that you talk about leading yourself. And that's, you can command compliance, but you cannot command commitment. Can you talk about the difference between compliance and commitment, and why the commitment part is so important?
So think about the best boss you ever had, and think about the worst boss you ever had.
Yep.
The worst boss you ever had, you complied to their orders because you had to, because you wanted to keep your job. You complied until you didn't have to. You complied because maybe you're supporting your family and you need the paycheck. Now think about the best boss you ever had. You probably chose to commit to them and their mission. Yep. You chose, not them. It wasn't positional leadership, meaning they're in a leadership role because of their title. You chose to commit to them. Leadership is about when people intentionally and purposely choose to follow you when they otherwise have the power to not. So I want to be that type of leader. I think it's important for us to strive to be that type of leader where people have the power to do something else, to follow somebody else, and yet they still choose to follow you. So compliance can be commanded, but commitment cannot. I
Yeah.
can't command you to commit to me. I have to earn that. I
Yep.
have to earn the respect. I have to earn the right for you to choose to commit to me. And so that's what all of the behaviors and actions and characteristics of excellent leadership is all about, trying to build the type of team or organization where people will intentionally choose to want to follow you, not just say, well, he's my boss, so I have to because I don't want to get fired and because I
Yep.
need this paycheck, right? Like we've all been that person before, I would imagine. At least most of us. I know I have. And so that's not the type of leader we want to be. We want to be the type of leader that is able to build a committed team of people, and that just takes a lot of never-ending work.
Yep. No, couldn't agree more. Um, I know self-discipline is a big part of it. Can you talk about what you do for self-discipline? Because we don't usually hear about this in a leadership context, but I very much follow a lot of the same principle. Wake up early, eat healthy, exercise. Like you got to have a little bit of that self-discipline as a leader. Why is that so important? Can you talk about your regimen specifically and what you do?
I just believe discipline creates trust. If I know that I can count on my leader or the person I'm following, that they're going to show up, they're going to be there, they're going to do the work, they're reliable, dependable. Again, not sexy words. They're consistent, not sexy, all very effective.
Yeah.
And so, discipline is important to me. I want to see, can somebody show up when it's hard? Can somebody consistently do it day after day after day? Consistency's in my family's DNA. It's something I think that's been ingrained in us from our dad and my mom from early on, that like, we show up and get to work every day, regardless. You don't feel bad, show up and get to work. And I think that's part of me. It's part of something I value very much, is somebody consistently showing up and doing the work. And in order to do that, I set routines and rituals in place. Yes, just like you mentioned, people are probably tired of hearing about morning routines, but it's important to me. I wake up early and have to move my body physically. That's really important to me. We get one body. I want to take care of it as best I can, to do everything I can to fuel it with healthy, whole foods as much as possible. I'm lucky to have a really great wife who studies that stuff constantly, so she helps me with that. And I love working out. Like it is more mental than physical for me to put strain on my body, to push myself beyond limits that I feel like I have. And doing that, I think, frees me up to be more creative later in the day, and puts me in a better position to lead other people and to write books and record podcasts and do all of that other work. So it also creates stamina and energy. And so I would say all of that is vital to me, that I do look for that in other people. I do look for people who are disciplined and have a work ethic and are consistent and reliable, and I can depend on them. That's something that's important to me. And if I sense a leader is not disciplined or isn't willing to do that, I'm probably not as apt to follow.
It's funny, from all the CEOs I interviewed, and even for my recent book alone, I talked to 140 CEOs, and one of the most consistent themes was work ethic. And everybody said there's no substitute for working hard. It doesn't matter how well you want to be, practicing empathy, or how good of a listener that you want to be. There is absolutely no substitute for working hard.
Yep.
And even though you're great at things like emotional intelligence, or even though you're great at all these other things, you still need to show up every day. You need to work hard, and not just work hard, but I think I forgot which CEO it was. He said that one of his rules is always show up and do 10% more than what you're asked. Mm-hmm. So, because people are going to recognize, and that's how you kind of show up. That's how you get these other opportunities. You do the things that other people don't want to do. You take the projects that other people don't want to take, the things that make you uncomfortable. So I love that focus on discipline. And I suppose it's a little bit of a tough love approach, and a lot of people are not comfortable with it, but it's what's required if you want to succeed and grow personally and professionally.
I had Carly Fiorina on my show. Have you talked to Carly yet?
No.
So she was a first female CEO of a Fortune 50 company. And Carly, I said, she started as like a secretary type job. And I said, how did you do that? And she said, early in my career, I always ran towards the fire.
Huh.
Oh, good metaphor. What do you mean? Say more. And she said, I always looked for the tough jobs that had
Yeah.
nothing to do with my current job. And I raised my hand and I ran towards them and I did them and I solved tough problems and was always willing to take
Yep.
on
I
the
love that.
challenge. And because she was running towards the fire regularly, she kept getting promoted and kept getting promoted. And hardly any of the what the work she was doing was within the realm of what her current job said she was to do. And so I think of people of like, if you can find a way to solve tough problems, that is one of the number one ways to build a career is seek out the tough problems, work hard to solve them. People will notice and they'll say, I want her on my team. I want him
Yeah.
on my team. If you're the type of person who does that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's go to the second part of the book, which is about building your team. And you had a story, and I was hoping you can share this about. You said when you were a first-time manager, and one of the big mistakes that you made for not firing someone. So
Yeah.
can you share that story and any other stories that pop into mind as far as big mistakes made when you were a first-time manager? What other mistakes were out there?
Well, so we in the selling world and I guess other parts of a business, if it's pretty black and white in our job, you're either hitting the number or you're not. And if you're at a certain level, then we had these performance plans, a performance improvement plan, a PIP, things like that. People
Yep.
call them. And there's one particular person on my team who was a single mother, and I loved her. I mean, she was great, a great person, a great mom, supported her family. However, was not, we had changed some things in our job and how we were going about it, and she wasn't doing great. Got put on a performance plan, and it got to the point where it was time to fire her, and I just couldn't do it. I felt terrible. I knew she was a sole breadwinner. We had a number of conversations about her personal life and family. I couldn't do it. Couldn't pull the trigger. I kept, "Hey, let's give her another month. Give her another month. Give her another month." And my boss was all over me, and HR even like, "What are you doing?" The plan said that she should have been fired months ago. Couldn't do it, and eventually it came to the day where I was getting pressure from above and others, and so I brought her in, and HR's in there, and my bosses even came in to sit down on this one, and
Jeez.
I did it, and she's crying and looked at me and said, I thought the plan didn't mean anything. I thought you were going to let me slide forever because I should have been fired months ago. And it just kind of dawned on me that part of being a manager and part of being a leader is holding people accountable. And my word became meaningless to a
Mhm.
number of people. I mean, everybody in that room. And then I even had some of my top performers walk up to me afterwards and say, "Yeah, we love her too. And she's great. But what are you doing, man? Like, you got to make tough decisions. That's part of being a leader." And we lost faith in you. We didn't think you could pull the trigger or make the tough call. And don't get me wrong, I mean, everyone hates firing people. Like, it's the
Yeah.
worst part of being in a management role is having to fire people. But that's part of the deal. Like, if you can't do that, you shouldn't be in that role. And certainly I like to think it comes from a good place and I can make excuses for myself. Oh, I felt bad for her family. But at the end of the day, it's not serving anybody to not hold people accountable. And so that was a big mistake I made early in my career that I learned from. And I was grateful that I did have people pull me aside and really question me and wonder if I could do the
Yeah.
job well, because I couldn't make the tough call. And I think I got better from that moment moving forward, because I learned that if I wanted to work in a job like that, I had to be willing to do it. And so I certainly took a lot of notes, and that's how it ended up in the book, because it still has had an impact on me to this day. And it was many years ago.
Yeah, and it's a tough story. I mean, I had something similar happen. Well, actually, both my wife did. Where when we were starting our businesses, we had somebody who we hired to help us with a lot of social media stuff. And when we first started our businesses, mine many years ago, she did a pretty good job to kind of help get things off the ground. But as things became bigger, as the business grew, as content started getting out there more frequently, she really, really, really struggled, and she just wasn't able to do it. And
Yeah.
every time we would go on meetings, there would always be an excuse. This didn't work. I'm sorry, I couldn't do this. I had to go here. I had this emergency I had to take care of. And it went on like this for, I don't know, 8 months. And I just couldn't let her go because she was with me from the beginning. I felt bad and guilty. And I thought, okay, well, she has a good excuse. And then finally, I just couldn't do it anymore because I realized that the business was fundamentally not growing because she was not able to keep up and help create this brand and share the content. And, we had a very hard conversation. We had to let her go, of course, crying, all that sort of stuff there was very, very unpleasant for me. But once that happened and I transitioned and brought on somebody else who was used to working in that more fast paced, larger scale environment, the business took off. So I think we kind of all go through that process of firing is hard. We don't want to do it. But there's a difference between kind of that personal connection and relationship. And I think sometimes the business side, and like you said, you do need to make those tough, unpleasant calls. Sometimes it's the nature of the beast, especially when you work for yourself. No one's there pushing you to do it. It's sort of like you have to come to that realization. And that I think is really, really tough.
It's hard, man. That's hard, man. Especially if you're a compassionate person. You have empathy for people and their situations. It's really hard, and it's the least fun part about, I think, leading is when you have to let people go. And but it is a necessary part of the job. And if it's not something you're willing or able to do, then you have to reassess. Maybe I shouldn't be in a job where I have to make these calls. And if that's the case, that's fine. I mean, that's fine. But make sure you learn that and move forward based on how you feel about that.
So maybe one more point before we jump to the last section of the book. You talk about the importance of deciding on the type of leader that you want to be. How do you decide on the kind of leader that you want to be? I mean, do you just mentally tell yourself, like, I want to be the type of leader that is empathetic. I want to be the type of leader who cares about people. Like, how do you build your leadership style, your persona to become an excellent leader?
I think it's a combination of what's unique about you and your personality and we're all some of our experiences, so the sum of your experiences as well as people you admire. And so I've regularly tried to mash together the combination of what's me as well as with the people I look up to the most. And that's kind of become, so what do they do that just blows me away, that they're so effective? So one of my bosses named Brian Miller was just this incredible storyteller, and the way he opened every single town hall was with an amazing story with no wasted words. And so Brian and I have had so many conversations about how I can become as good a storyteller as him. Right. My dad just writes these epically awesome emails to his team, and I would get inside his head to ask him, what's your mindset around putting together an email? Like these little things that I'm taking bit after bit after bit from people and taking the qualities that they have and then really combining it with my own personality. And that's the type of leader that I want to be. So I would say it's a combination. Like the world, you grow up, sometimes you think the world's black and white. And what you realize as you mature and grow is the world is just gray. And I mean that in a good way, because there's this messy middle that Brent B. Shore talks about. And I had him on my show, and he's like, that's what the world's like. So when it comes to developing your style, there's no one size fits all. There's no one way you have to be. I'd say take what's authentically you and combine it with the people you really look up to the most and see if you can implement some new key ideas or ways they go about leading people that you love in order to make it still yours, but add in bits and pieces along the way so you can get better at parts of this leadership game that you really like.
Love it. Well, I know we're pretty much out of time, so maybe we could just touch for 1 minute or so on the last section of the book, just so people have a little bit of context. And that's leading your team. And you talk about the importance of setting a clear strategy, vision, communicating effectively. What do you think is really important for people to take away from that section of the book on lead your team?
I would just say that there are, when you get placed or you earn a leadership role, knowing all of the attributes or the parts of the job are important. For example, I said I'm going to be the rah inspirational guy to my team, and all of the management stuff of figuring out how to work within the constraints of the system, or the numbers part, or all of the analytics, or the parts that you have to send off to partners. I'll have somebody else do that stuff for me. I don't really want to do that. And I remember my dad sat me down and he's like, dude, you have to do all three. And what he mean by all three was you have to lead, you have to manage, and you have to coach, right?
Yeah.
The coaching for the performance and coaching for development, the grand inspirational visionary stuff, as well as the management and administration and stewardship of resources. That's what the management part. If you want to be good in one of those roles, you've got to focus on all three and not try to outsource those parts of the job. That's part of the deal. And I didn't realize that or think about that initially. I thought I don't have to do those other parts, and that was just wrong. And I'd say for those who get promoted, think those through and work on crafting each of those to the best of your ability, and continually working on getting better at them too.
Well, Ryan, I mean, I can't believe the time already went by this quickly. I mean, it's crazy. I still have like 20 questions I could ask you, but it's good because this will give people a lot of incentive to check out your book and check out your podcast. So, can you let people know where can they go to learn more about you, your book, your podcast? I mean, anything that you want to mention for people to check out, please feel free to do so.
Learningleader.com is where everything is. You can get a hold of me there too, as well as if you are an audio listener and you're only on your phone, you can text the word learners to 44222. So texting learners to 44222 also gets access to pretty much everything that I do, or you can go to learningleader.com and you'll see everything that I do there.
I love it. Ryan, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with me.
Thanks, Jacob. I appreciate your preparation and getting a chance to talk to you today, man. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I agree. And thanks everyone for tuning in. My guest again, Ryan Hawk. Check out his book, Welcome to Management, and don't forget to check out his podcast. Again, it's one of the most popular leadership and management podcasts on the planet, and it is called the Learning Leader Podcast. I will see all of you next week.